All right, I'm glad to have everyone with us as we're doing our next part of this study in wisdom and what is wisdom. For this particular study, we're going to try to take what we've learned so far about wisdom and foolishness and put the two things together to make the contrast. We did a little bit of that last time, and so admittedly, this will be a lot of the same verses, just trying to take a different perspective from them that we've used in our study of the wise man and what his behavior is like and the folly of the foolish. So it'd be some new verses we haven't looked at yet, some verses maybe we didn't really touch on, but we just took a small point from, and then some of the same verses that we've been through in those two lessons, and trying to draw out those comparisons to see what is the difference. What does it look like when somebody's foolish and when somebody has wisdom? Now, I'll admit also, I'm not going to say a lot about the speech, the way it affects the way somebody talks, because I'm doing a whole lesson on that next week. That's actually one of the main characteristics you'll see of a foolish person according to the Bible, especially as we're looking to the book of Proverbs. One of the main things that's noted about a foolish person, and one of the easiest things God says you can look for to see as an evidence of foolishness, is the speech and how it affects that. So we'll be looking at the mouth of foolishness next week. Today we're just going to do a pretty straightforward. I try to keep it relatively simple. I've got a lot of notes, but because it's stuff we've hit on before, maybe I can keep it simple, of the comparison between wisdom and foolishness. So anyways, I appreciate everyone who's here. I'm glad to see we already had a good number of you here waiting on me when I came to start the live stream. So I'm glad for that. I give my greetings to everybody, and we'll go ahead and get started into the study. So our text, I'm going to start with probably a little bit of a strange verse in Psalm 49:10. If you want to follow along in your Bible, I'll give you a second to get there as I actually bring up the wisdom chart just for comparison for everybody's sake. Yeah, there we go. So for comparison, for everybody's sake, for the wisdom chart, we see that we've already talked about how that the heart of it for everybody is their heart, and whether it's touched by wisdom, by unbelief, or the fear of the Lord. And once your heart has been touched by one of those two things, you can proceed in one of two directions. You'll either, as the fear of the Lord rules in your heart, proceed towards wisdom, or as you look at this world completely affected by unbelief, you'll go into foolishness. And the only reason I'm bringing that up, because I know we've talked about that 100 times already, is to make sure it's always understood that the problem of the foolish man, like the issue for him, is his heart. That the fool hath said in his heart that there is no God. Whereas one of the verses we intend to look at tonight, that is there any price that a fool can pay to get wisdom, seeing he hath no heart for it? So understanding that, we know that the heart of the fool is his issue, while the heart of the wise man is his benefit. It's both of these issues are coming forth from the heart. So it's very much keep the heart with all diligence, for out of it the issues of life kind of thing. Because in the case of both the fool and the wise man, the issue, whether good or bad, is a heart issue. It's that the wise man has a good heart because he has deep down realized that there is a God, and he's being pulled in that direction. It doesn't mean that you have to have a full-on faith in God to have wisdom. It's just wisdom and belief in God will run together. Someone who approaches this world with the atheistic mentality that there is no God, no matter what, you can't convince me. Even I know people who don't believe in God who understand that that's foolish. You hear a lot of people talk about, how can you say there's no God? Have you checked everywhere? The universe is very large. Have you looked everywhere to see if you could find him? You see that that's a foolish mentality to begin with. To come to approach everything with this unbelief, this atheistic mentality that there's no God. So you see very much that the two things run hand in hand together that way. Whereas someone who has wisdom in their heart, it's going to be connected to and attached to this idea of okay, I realize that this universe is bigger than me. There's more going on here. All right, so with that foundation, let's go to Psalm 49:10. I'll give you plenty enough time to find it. So Psalm 49, verse number 10 says, "For he seeth that wise men die, likewise the fool and the brutish person perish. and leave their wealth to others. Now, I've chosen to start there because this is actually fairly more common of a question and a theme in the Bible, especially in Ecclesiastes. It's talked about in quite a bit of detail than you would probably think. And that is this idea of, is there a difference between the wise and the foolish person, considering that at the end of the day, you're going to die anyways. At the end of the day, whatever you build in wisdom will still be left behind for somebody else. Now, in this passage, the point is just showing that, God sees this, that, this is the perspective from God that, men are men and they're going to die. It doesn't matter, what abilities or lack of ability somebody has. In Ecclesiastes, the question comes about because you have to understand what Ecclesiastes is. It's a science experiment wherein Solomon is trying to find the meaning of life without God. And he's finding that without God, there is nothing. It's without God, it doesn't benefit you to be wise or foolish or anything. You just might as well enjoy your life and get it over with. That's the point of what's going on in Ecclesiastes. And it's actually, to me, it's a little bit, ironic is probably not the right word for it. It's tragic, I guess, that Solomon is even asking the question when Solomon, through wisdom, built an incredible life. Built a kingdom like we could not imagine, and through foolishness broke every bit of it down. The foolishness he had wherein he did not listen to God, he did not listen to his mother, he did not listen to his father, he listened to his heart and his own flesh, and followed after foolishness. He destroyed everything. You can debate what happened in his legacy. You can debate whether or not he actually sacrificed his own children. However, there is plenty to point to that. One of the chief things being that it does talk about taking children into the valley of, I believe it's Hinnom, where they would sacrifice children. There's verses that seem to hint to him taking his children there. We know for sure he was married to women who worshiped gods that required child sacrifice, and we're told that he participated in their religions. So those things would seem to hint to it. But the biggest thing is a man with over 900 wives and concubines somehow only had one heir that we know of. He only had the one son with Rehoboam. And so most people assume that he sacrificed, one primary. I have to correct myself on that because I'm not sure. I didn't check to make sure I'm right to say that there's only one in total. But he doesn't have much there going in terms of heirs. As far as I can think of, there's the one. But you have this man who, with wisdom, built one of the greatest kingdoms you could ever imagine, was wealthy beyond all imagination, had people coming from across the world, as far as his story had traveled, to meet him and to learn from him and just glean from him. And then when he stopped listening and began to be foolish, and begin to entertain the question of, is there a God and what would life be without God? That's when he destroyed his life. So that's why I guess it's tragic. It may be a little bit ironic as well that you have this man asking the question, is there a difference between the wise and the fool? Is there a difference between, someone being foolish and someone being wise? Does it really matter in the end, is his question. And that's not a question being asked in Psalm 49:10, but it is a point that's being delivered to us to consider. Now, of course, the point is actually completely answered throughout the Bible that, yes, there's a huge difference between the wise and the fool. If there's no God, there's still a difference between the wise and the fool. But admittedly, they do both end in death. So now, saying that, since we know there is a difference between the wise and the fool, we've already studied that and talked about that some. Let's try to answer some questions about what are the differences. And really, it comes down to one major issue, that issue of the heart. And because of that issue in the heart, everything else proceeds out. And even then, there's still one root issue before it starts to branch off. And that one root issue is that the fool doesn't receive commandments. So let's look at that first. I'll take that from Proverbs 10, verse 8 through 10. So Proverbs 10, verse number 8 says, "The wise in heart will receive commandments, but a prating fool shall fall. He that walketh uprightly walketh surely, but he that perverteth his ways shall be known. He that winketh with the eye causeth sorrow, but a prating fool shall fall." So God's emphasizing this to you twice in just 3 verses, that a prating fool, which prating is usually defined as being someone with a lot of idle talk, babbling, talks foolishly is the way we would say it. But a prating fool, fool who babbles and talks like that he will fall. So the wise in heart will receive commandments, but a fool who just wants to talk and doesn't want to hear anything will fall. That's the point of the verse, but then he goes on to reemphasize that by talking about a few other things, how the righteous contrast against this. And it still comes down to the point that a prating fool, someone who's in their foolishness just wants to talk and doesn't want to hear anything, will fall. And so in reality, you could almost divide that verse into tonight's lesson and next week's lesson, because next week we'll talk about the prating part, the part that he just wants to talk. And tonight we're going to talk about the foolish part, that he will fall. The fact that he's not going to hear anything, he's not going to receive instruction, and because of that, he's going to fall. So we said that one of the key defining characteristics, like probably the most defining trait of a wise man, is that he listens and he receives instruction. So then it's not strange, or at least it shouldn't be strange, that probably the key defining trait of a foolish person is that they will not receive instruction. They're not teachable. They don't want to be. Now, we saw in the case of wisdom, the reason why they are so teachable and the reason why they do take instruction so well largely lies in the fact that wisdom comes with understanding. So when you couple those two things together, an ability to apply your knowledge and an ability to understand your knowledge, the two things very similar in nature, but when you put them together, it makes somebody very teachable. Whereas when you have someone who doesn't know how to apply the knowledge they have, and is scornful, so that they're not willing to even try to understand or take in new information, they become very unteachable. So it's natural when you look at it in those terms. It's very, very natural that somebody who has foolishness in their heart is not going to be very teachable. From here is where your points begin to divide, where they begin to branch out and make new points. So that division, first I see in Proverbs 12, verse 15. I'll go there for the first part of this branching out, I should say. Proverbs 12 and verse number 15 says, "The way of a fool is right in his own eyes, but he that hearkeneth unto counsel is wise." So he tells you that the issue really comes down to this, that the fool doesn't want to be taught. He's not willing to receive because of the fact that in his own eyes, he feels like he's right already. Now, we know it goes deeper, it goes to the heart, and that'll be my second point. But I wanted to start with this in the order that the verses actually come in this case, that what you find being taught to you about the fool as you're going through Proverbs, and you've come to the conclusion in chapter 10 that the fool's not going to receive commandments. You get over to chapter 12, and you're told the reason why he's not going to receive those commandments is because he's already in his heart made up his mind. He's already set his path in his eyes, and he's not willing to consider anything else. He's not willing to consider, is this really the right direction? And that's where you really see how scornfulness plays into this, because, like I said, man, when you couple wisdom and understanding, you come out with prudence. And prudence is that looking down the road, seeing where your path is going, and making decisions accordingly. When you couple foolishness and scornfulness, you come out with someone who's hasty in their actions. Someone who doesn't consider the direction the path is taking them. They're not interested in it. They're just rushing into whatever feels right to them. And so the fool, because of that, he's got a way that it feels right. He's sure that, I'm 100% sure I know what I'm doing right now, that I'm already on the right path. And as someone who, as a pastor, is an educator, someone who's taught many different forms of education. I've substitute taught in Christian schools. I've been a pastor, been a Sunday school teacher, worked with children's classes. I've done a lot of stuff as far as being in some field of education. My mom's a school teacher. My sister-in-law is a school teacher. I'm very heavily involved in education in some capacity or another. So saying that, one of the very first things I notice about somebody that really troubles me and makes me worried about them is when you're trying to explain something to them and they constantly insist they've already got it figured out. And I can say that sometimes people who you have in high regard, people who you see, they go to church, they're faithful, they are, people who seem to be spiritual. They have good standards, they live a good life, so forth. One of the things that holds them back and hurts them is when you're trying to teach them, they lack some meekness. They lean towards foolishness more than anybody would want to say, because whenever you try to tell them something they're doing wrong, or when you're trying to warn them about something, you're trying to teach them or show them in something, they always have an answer. Well, I've already thought about that. Yeah, I'm sure that I'm doing the right things. I've thought about all this stuff. And the truth is, there can be times where that's legitimate. There can be the opportunity that somebody, or the occasion, I should say, that somebody has thought it all the way through. But that's very rare. I mean, as a pastor and as a leader, I can tell you, as someone who it's my job to sit down and think about all the variables and take it all in and make a judgment call on it before I make a move. It's very rare that I manage to actually get it all and calculate it and all taken into consideration. It's very helpful to me to have people around me who I can ask a question and they'll point something out to me. They'll bring something up. And my wife is a perfect balance for me in this, that sometimes she frustrates me because of the fact that she looks at stuff so differently than how I look at it. But it's a good foil for me. It's a good balance because she does bring a different perspective. And sometimes quite often she helps me to see that one place that I've missed. In all my calculations, I missed this. I didn't see this. And there are times that I need that from other people as well. That's why I don't mind when people ask me questions. I don't mind that people, bring opinions and so forth. But that's the thing, is if there's wisdom at all. I'm not going to be arrogant to call myself a wise person. But if there's a drop of wisdom in my heart at all, I should be willing to be teachable. I should be willing to receive instruction. If I have already said in my mind that my way is right and I'm not willing to hear anything else, then I am a foolish and scornful person. Doesn't matter how much I present myself as being spiritual. Doesn't matter how good I am at anything else. It really is a symptom of foolishness and scornfulness in the heart when you have already set in your mind that you're going a certain way, that this is right, and I'm not willing to hear anything else. I'm not willing to even consider anything else. So one of the things I could take from this, a practical lesson for everyone watching, is be very careful about that. I mean, one of the fruit of the Spirit is meekness, and meekness would be to be teachable. It would be the opposite of what I'm describing a fool as being like right now. It is someone who's willing to receive that information and take it and consider it. It's something that goes very good with wisdom. So the other things I notice in terms of the fool, we talked about this verse. In fact, I think it's our starting verse we used to get into the lesson. Actually, both my next sets of verses. Ecclesiastes 2 is the starting verse, but we'll do Proverbs 14 before we get there. Proverbs 14, verse 15 and 16. Yeah, sounds right. Proverbs 14, verse 15 and 16. In fact, I'll even throw in verse 8 for good measure. It says, "The wisdom of the prudent is to understand his way, but the folly of fools is deceit." Verse 15, "The simple believeth every word, but the prudent man looketh well to his going. A wise man feareth and departeth from evil, but the fool rageth and is confident." So what he's showing you about the contrast between the way that a foolish person and a wise person looks at their life is this. A wise man takes it very seriously, realizing that I can't just play with some decisions. Like I can't just, I think I'll move here. I think I'll do that. There's things that you shouldn't be playing with. You should be looking at where these things are going to take you. You should be looking at how these decisions are going to affect your life for the long road. So you should be looking at all of this and making your decisions accordingly. Whereas a foolish person, on the other hand, they're very proud, angry at anyone trying to correct them, and they just rage on doing whatever they've decided in their heart they're going to do. They don't consider. If I look at my path and I realize that if I keep going in the direction I'm going, that this is going to lead to evil, and I persist, God says I'm a fool. If I don't even consider it, God says I'm a fool. If there's wisdom in my heart, I will consider what direction this is taking me. And if I see that it's bad, I will turn from it. So if if somebody tells you going down this road is bad, you don't want to hear it, you're foolish. If somebody tells you going down this road is bad and you say, I know it, but you still go down anyways, it's foolish. I don't necessarily use this example because it's not really 100% what I'm saying, but it's a pretty good illustration for the point. And so I'll leave out names and who it was. But there was somebody who several years ago, I was trying to give counsel to get out of a bad situation because it was affecting them and it was hurting them spiritually. So somewhat of an illustration for this. But it was affecting their spiritual life. It was hurting them, and I kept advising them to get out of it. They didn't want to listen to me. And they kept saying, I know what I'm doing. I know what I'm doing. And somebody even brought that up to me. So, well, they said they know what they're doing. And my illustration for them was, if somebody's hitting themselves in the head with a hammer and then says, I know what I'm doing, that doesn't make it any less dumb. You can know what you're doing when you hit yourself in the head with a hammer. That doesn't make it less dumb. If you still rage on and press on because it's what you want to do, even when you know it's destructive and hurtful, it's foolish. So it's actually a pretty good comparison. The problem is that the person who I said this to and about back then, who has since come around and realized I was right about the situation, still may listen to this, and I don't want to hurt their feelings. So I don't mean any offense. I'm just using it because it's a good example. So that's to understand what it looks like. Ecclesiastes 2 verse 14, I wanted to throw in there as well and include it because we did talk about that the other day. In fact, we used it to introduce the lesson about the behavior of a wise man. And this is where you will see, I also want to give it to you for this. This is where you'll see Solomon making that discussion about, does it matter? I think it's here. Maybe it's Ecclesiastes 8 actually. But you see in Ecclesiastes 2:14, I think it's Ecclesiastes 8, where he makes the discussion there. He has that discussion about, is it better? Does it make any benefit in my life to be wise? It says, the wise man's eyes are in his head, but the fool walketh in darkness. And I myself perceived also that one event happeneth to them all. So no, it's here. It says, and then said I in my heart, as it happeneth to the fool, so it happeneth even to me. And why was I then more wise? Then I said in my heart that this also is vanity. I say it's a little bit tragic, even a little bit foolish, and somewhat ironic that Solomon is saying, why is this happening to me? The same what happens to the fool when he chose to make himself foolish at this point in his life by refusing to use the wisdom that was there for him. Because you'll notice this about the fool. I didn't bring it out in one of the verses I just read in the last chapter. But you'll notice this. It says the fool his way is deceit. He deceives himself. He makes his way crooked. In fact, you find that there's verses that says he makes his way froward, or verses that says he makes his way perverse. He chooses to make his path crooked. It's not that the wisdom's not there. He just doesn't want to see it. And that's actually what you're seeing in this verse, is that the wise man has his eyes in his head. He sees what's in front of him. He sees where it's going. But the fool's like somebody who's walking in darkness. Or it's said this way in Proverbs, because Proverbs actually says something very, very similar to this. In Proverbs 17, verse number 24, it says, wisdom is before him that hath understanding, but the eyes of a fool are in the ends of the earth. A foolish son is a grief to his father, and bitterness to her that bare him. But what is he saying there? That a wise man, a man of understanding, can see the wisdom that's in front of him. He can take and look at this world that's right there in front of him and use the wisdom that's available to understand and process and apply this information and so forth. But he says a fool, he can't see that wisdom that's in front of him. Like what I'm teaching right now, it's wasted on a foolish person, is what he's saying. If I try to give this to a foolish person, it's wasted on them because they can't see it. They're looking off to the ends of the earth. They're looking way beyond everything, at all this other stuff, but they're not seeing the wisdom that's right there in front of them. Then Proverbs 19:3, Proverbs 19 and verse number 3 says, the foolishness of man perverteth his ways. This is one of the verses I was mentioning. And his heart fretteth against the Lord. So that foolishness that is in the heart of a fool perverteth his ways. It's not that there's not a straight way in front of him. It's not that there's a lack of wisdom available, that nobody's tried to teach him or nobody's tried to help him. It's that his own heart and the foolishness that's there is perverting, is to say it's to bend or to twist or to crooked. So is froward. It's like this idea of taking what is straight and crooking it and making it crooked and bending it. So he's saying that the foolishness in his heart, even if there's wisdom available, it doesn't matter because it twists it and turns it and makes it crooked. So that for him, he can't see the wisdom that's there. So that's the first point I say about how you can see where it branches out, that the foolish man won't receive commandments. And the first branch of that is you see that he won't receive it because in his heart, he's already made up his mind and he's not listening. He's not wanting to hear anything. Then that brings you to this point of him being unteachable, which is my second one, which comes in at the verse I mentioned, Proverbs 17 and verse 10. Proverbs 17 and verse 10 says, a reproof entereth more into a wise man than 100 stripes into a fool. And we talked about this last time. I think we mentioned this verse. I think earlier I was saying this one when I actually meant verse 16, or maybe I didn't say the verse, maybe I just said in chapter 17, where it says that his heart doesn't allow him. So let me give you that one too while I'm in 17. It says, wherefore is there a price in the hand of a fool to get wisdom, seeing he hath no heart to it? So the two of these combine to give you this idea that the fool's problem being his heart, it's not just that he's got this pride and he's set his eyes a certain way and he's not willing to be moved or changed or to hear anything, but it really comes down to his heart, that he has this issue that he can't just receive wisdom. He can't take it because he doesn't have a heart for that. It's like you're trying to plug in. I think I brought you an American plug, something from America, and you're trying to plug it into a European outlet. It just doesn't work. You can't do it because it just doesn't fit. You got to find some adapter. You got to get something to help you because it's not naturally going to happen. And that's kind of the picture that's being painted here about the fool, is that he's just not able. He just doesn't have it in him to receive it that way. And so that's why the verse we read there in 17:10, the reproof entereth more into a wise man than 100 stripes into a fool. That's why you have this issue that he's just not going to get it. You can beat him, but he's still not going to get it. Whereas a wise man so naturally receives it that you can tell him he's wrong, and it'll do more than beating a fool 100 times will do. So that shows you the difference between how they receive stuff. A man who has wisdom, if I tell him he's wrong, if I correct him and say, look, you're wrong about this, it's enough. It's enough to move his heart and change him. But someone who is foolish, I can beat them 100 times, and they're still not going to get the point. And so that really, I think, is where most of us can start to see what foolishness looks like in terms of what the issue, that it's a hard issue, that they just can't apply whatever knowledge is available to them. They just don't know how to use it. It's not to say they don't know anything. Because the fact is, somebody can be foolish and have an education. They can be foolish and have a very high level of education. It's just that they don't know how to take all that information that's given to them and apply it. And someone can be foolish and quote to you all kinds of information, statistics, and they may be able to give you a lot of information. They may know a lot of trivia. In fact, sometimes the most foolish people I know a lot of trivia. I've got a relative, who I won't go into who it is, that I love him very dearly. And he can quote to you some of the most out there trivia you could ever imagine, knows a whole lot of stuff, but he doesn't know how to do anything with it. He doesn't know how to use that information because he just doesn't have a heart for it. He knows how to give you like cheap party tricks where, he can tell you things that nobody else knows. That he knows how to do stuff like that. He knows how to say something that sounds intelligent on the surface, but if you just scratch it a little bit, it starts to fall apart and you realize that doesn't actually know half of what he's putting on and pretending. A foolish man's words are going to give him away. That's why we're going to talk about that next week. They're going to give him away because they may sound good at first, but after you measure them just a little bit, you start to realize that this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. He may know some stuff, but he doesn't actually understand what that stuff means. So then I also would like to mention Proverbs 1 and verse 7. I didn't write that one down, but that goes really good with this. So let me see if I can find that real quick. Proverbs 1 and verse 7. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. So he says from the beginning of Proverbs, he tells you this fool he despises wisdom and instruction. He doesn't want to learn. Then Proverbs 17, 16, we just read that. Proverbs 26, 5 and 6. Get to that one real quick since I got my stuff out of order there for a second. It says, answer a fool according to his folly, lest he be wise in his own conceit. Verse 4 and 5 of Proverbs 26. Answer not a fool according to his folly, lest thou be like unto him. Answer a fool according to his folly, lest he be wise in his own conceit. Now, that's not a contradiction in the verses. It's God showing you how contrary a fool is. That the truth is he needs help. He needs someone to answer him. But at the same time, you are running a danger when you do answer him. If you do, like if I hear somebody saying something's foolish, there is no winning, essentially, is what it comes down to. If I ignore him and don't say anything to someone who's being foolish, then I'm not helping him. I'm letting him grow beyond foolishness into being wise in his own conceit, which is something worse according to the Bible than foolish, just being foolish. This is when you put together wisdom, foolishness, knowledge, and all this stuff. This is what you get, and it's one of the most dangerous combinations you can find when it comes to the wisdom chart and all of that. But he says, if I don't say anything, I'm going to let him get worse. I'm going to let him grow and become more and more foolish if I don't call him out on it. However, at the same time, if I do call him out on it, well, then the other verse there, verse 4 says, lest thou also be like unto him. If I do call him out on it, I'm going to be made to look foolish. It's that saying that, if two fools argue, then both lose, or if a wise man and foolish man, this other version of it, argue, if they contend, then they both lose. They're both found to be foolish. It's that saying. It's just God saying it to you this way, that if you correct a foolish man, you're both going to look foolish. If you don't correct a foolish man, you're going to let him become beyond foolish. You're going to let him grow into a point where he becomes dangerous because he has knowledge, but he doesn't know how to use it. So God's giving you that to show you that foolishness is not something that's safe to be messed with. It's very dangerous for somebody to be foolish, because the more somebody grows in knowledge while never learning the ability, never cultivating that ability to use that knowledge, they become a very dangerous person. That's what wise in your own conceit is considered to be very dangerous in the Bible. God says multiple times that there's more hope of a fool than someone who's wise in their own conceit. Or he says similar statements to that. But God says very plainly that there's more hope of a fool than someone who's wise in his own conceit. So it's a very, very dangerous thing for someone to reach that point. And we'll talk about much later in this series what that really means. Just know for now it's a combination of when you put you put foolishness, scornfulness, and knowledge together. It makes a very dangerous mixture. It's very explosive. And he says that if you don't do anything about it, that's where the fool will probably go. If you try to do something about it, you're very likely to wind up looking worse yourself than the fool looked. So it's a very dangerous thing to mess with. And God's warning you to use some discretion. Be very careful about how you approach these things. And so Proverbs 15 and verse 5 helps you to understand a little bit of why that is. Still in that thought of the fact that the fool just doesn't want to be taught. He's not willing to receive it. His heart's not able. He doesn't want to because he already has his own way. And so Proverbs 15 and verse 5 says, a fool despiseth his father's instruction, but he that regardeth reproof is prudent. So the answer is that a fool despiseth even when his own father, even when someone who has authority over him, teaches him and tries to instruct him, he despises that. But he that regardeth reproof is prudent. Now, prudent being the ability to see down the road, see where you're going, but it's an extension of wisdom and understanding being mixed together. So prudence is on the wisdom side of things. So he's saying someone who regardeth, who takes that reproof and considers, are you right? Am I really making a bad decision here? That person's prudent. But the fool's never going to do that because they despise instruction. They don't want even their own father to teach them. So that's the thing. If you don't like when somebody corrects you, God says you're foolish. If when somebody corrects you, you refuse to hear it, God says you're foolish. If when somebody corrects you, you say, I've already figured it out, I already know, God says you're foolish. If you refuse to consider the possibility of being wrong or whatever other ways you could go and so forth, God says you're foolish. A wise man will always take those things in and consider them, but a fool despiseth them, doesn't have a heart to it, doesn't want to do it, and so forth. So then that actually brings us to where, I guess while we're in Proverbs 15, I'll also mention verse 20. It's a good verse to make sure you have. A wise son maketh a glad father, but a foolish son despiseth his mother. So you see that contrast, that a wise son will make their parents glad, make their parents, to rejoice in them, to glory in them. But a foolish son is going to despise the people that God put there to instruct them and help them. And that shows you the difference of the relationship. A wise child is going to listen to their parents and it's going to make they're going to make their parents glad, whereas a foolish child is going to despise the very people that God gave them to help them because they don't want to do it. Then the last of the points is, I'll begin in Proverbs 3 for that. Proverbs 3 and verse 35. And we actually already introduced this when we said that the end of all this really seems to come to the same place. They're all going to die one way or the other. So why should I listen to people if, the wise man and the fool's both going to die? Why should I listen to people? And he says this, that the wise shall inherit glory, Proverbs 3:35, but shame shall be the promotion of fools. See, God tells you. Solomon asked the question, is there a difference? He says it's not fair that I'm so wise and yet I'm going to die just like the fool when behaving as a fool at the moment. God tells you himself that he sees that and understands that in the end, everybody's going to die and they're going to move on, and whatever they built on this earth will pass to the next generation, will eventually be destroyed. Solomon's not wrong about that. But God also takes a lot of time to show you that there is a difference between the two of them. That the wise man will, let me make sure I read that properly. The wise man shall inherit glory, and the fool's promotion, the thing that he's going to graduate into, is shame. So it's almost the same idea, promotion and inheritance in this case. The contrast is the same. He's just giving you different words for poetic purposes, but also to give you a little bit of a different understanding of the two. That wisdom will bring the person that has it into a glorious life. They'll bring them into glory and so forth. It's a very simplified version of what he's saying when I say it like that. Whereas the fool is going to be made shamed. They're going to be made ashamed. So if you want to see why you should care that there's a difference, even if both of them are going to end up in the grave one day anyways, it really comes down to the fact that in this life and in the next, one of these things can help bring you a more glorious life, and the other one's going to bring you shame. It's going to come down to a lot of that. It's actually deeper, though, because God actually says quite a bit more. God also says in Proverbs 10 and verse 21, I thought I missed one of my verses earlier, but I got it. Proverbs 10 verse 21, the lip of the righteous feed many, but fools die for want of wisdom. The lips of the righteous feed many, but fools die for want of wisdom. So he's saying that it will be destructive to you in this life, that if you're wise, you'll not be able to just help yourself, but you'll be able to help others. But if you're foolish, it's going to be destructive to you and those around you. He says in chapter 9, so go back one chapter in verse 6, forsake the foolish and live, and go in the way of understanding. Now, this is talking about receiving wisdom, and he's telling us to forsake the foolish. Don't do this. Don't go in the way of foolishness. Save yourself. That's what it means. Forsake the foolish and live is like saying don't follow after foolish people. Save yourself. Go into the way of understanding. So God does tell you that you should seek after understanding and wisdom. Then in Proverbs 13 and verse 20, it says, he that walketh with wise men shall be wise, but a companion of fools shall be destroyed. This is why he tells you to save yourself, because if you stay friends with foolish people, if you stick around foolish people, you're going to destroy yourself. You will be destroyed. But if you'll stick around wise people, you will learn wisdom yourself. You will be saved by wisdom from the destruction of foolishness. And then finally, Proverbs 21 and verse 20, it says, there is treasure to be desired and oil in the dwelling of the wise, but a foolish man spendeth it up. He's saying if you will be wise, you will bless your own life. You will lay up treasure in this life. There will be wealth, so to speak, from it. But the fool is going to spend all that up. They're going to waste their life. They're going to waste whatever benefits are available in this life, and they're going to waste the life that they have itself. So the answer is to the difference between the two really comes down to that one issue of the foolish person, that they will not receive commandments while the wise do. The wise receive commandments and live. The fool reject commandments. They won't receive commandments, can't receive commandments, however you want to say it. And so they fall because of that. They're destroyed. So you have a choice. Your life really has, in terms of wisdom and foolishness, it's a spectrum. I understand not everybody's going to be as wise as somebody else. You can be on the side of wisdom and still have a little bit of foolishness in your decision making. So it's a spectrum. It's not like it's fixed that you're one or the other. It's a scale, and you can go more into the wisdom and eventually reach sound wisdom. You can go more into foolishness and eventually reach frowardness. And we'll talk more about those after we talk about the other basic building blocks of intelligence and unintelligence. But at the end of the day, you have a choice, and it really is going to come down to your heart and your relationship with God. But the first place you can see where it manifests, and one of the things you can try to fix, is it comes down a lot to your teachability. So one of the first things I would say to do is to eliminate from your vocabulary, yeah, I already know. Yeah, I already thought about that. In fact, one of the best things you can do is even if somebody is telling you something you've already thought about, is go ahead and take the information, because maybe if you let them talk, they'll still give you something you didn't think about. A lot of times, the best thing you can do is just listen, take it in and consider it. Fool speaks presently, fool speaks fast. A wise man hears and takes it into his heart. We'll talk more about those kind of things next week. So one of the best things you can do practically. Now, obviously, the best thing you can do is the Lord giveth wisdom. Out of his mouth comes knowledge and understanding. If any man lack wisdom, let him ask of God, who giveth liberally and upbraideth not. The best thing you can do is work on that hard issue and go to God about it. Realize first, you have to realize in the fear of the Lord that there is a God, and come to him asking for help. But if you'll come to him and ask for help, he'll cultivate and grow wisdom in your heart. Then practically, if you are someone who has tried that, you're doing that, you're trying, then one of the things I'd recommend is just eliminate from your vocabulary, I've already thought about it. I already know. I'm already doing that. Take time to listen and learn and receive instruction that's being given to you, because otherwise you're just going to make yourself more foolish if you refuse to be taught. All right, if somebody has a question, I got done, still a long lesson, but I got done early enough that I can take a question or two. So if you have a question, go ahead and throw that up really quick. I know it takes time to type them, but if you can type me a question real quick, I'll be glad to try to answer it for you. Just make sure, like I say, when it comes to this thing of understanding wisdom and foolishness, is to realize that it does matter. I know that if you take the wrong verse out of context, you might not think it matters, but it does matter which one you do, because one is destructive, one is going to mess up your life, one's going to make you waste your life, the other will help you to have a productive life. It'll help you to do something good with your life that's glorious, not just in this life, but even in the next life, in the life to come. All right, so I have one that says, I have a question. Wise people can say, for example, a person is a fool. So if he says, I don't want to be your friend because you're a fool, then how can a fool have a wise friend? I don't often know many wise friends who tell somebody, I don't want to be your friend because you're a fool. To be honest with you, if somebody doesn't want to help somebody, that speaks negative in terms of wisdom versus foolishness, because the wise man, according to a lot of these verses, is going to try to help somebody. It doesn't mean he's going to hang out with them all the time or be their best friend, to just pal around and be buddies all the time, but they're still trying to teach and help somebody. So if somebody's not trying to teach and help somebody, they're not answering questions, not, discussing things and so forth, then it doesn't speak good for the person who you're calling a wise man in this scenario. In terms of a situation where you have someone who you want to be friends with who, let's say, is above you, then the truth is the answer is always for you to rise up. Now, at the end of the day, everybody has a choice what they want to do, whether they want to spend time with somebody, be friends with somebody, so forth. But when there's a lack of standards, let's say, between one person and another, the person who is lower should always rise up to the other. And you see that as a clear Bible teaching when he talks about the fact that if you have somebody who, for example, believes it's a sin to eat meat and they only eat herbs, he says, when you're with that person, eat herbs. Don't cause them to stumble by eating meats. If you have somebody who believes that you can't eat the meat from the market where they sold the meat to be offered to idols, then he said, if you're with that person, don't eat the meat that's going to cause them to stumble. So there's an understanding that if you're the one who's lower, you should always raise instead of trying to bring somebody down. So I guess the answer to that is, if it's genuinely someone who's wise, but they're careful about how they spend their time with somebody, because I'm trying to make sure I understand the spirit of the question here. But if they are careful about how they spend their time with somebody, and so they're not giving the help that you think you want, or whatever in this case, they're not giving the amount of time and friendship, then I would sit back and study myself and try to correct myself and fix whatever problems there may be there. I would deal with, you can fix yourself. You can't really change somebody else, but you can fix yourself in this case. And God offers wisdom more so than any person does. So I would definitely be seeking out wisdom from God's hand. I would ask God, who gives liberally and upbraideth not. I would study in His Word. I would look to grow and increase my wisdom there. And over time, you'll see how things go. All right. If I didn't answer your question properly, then go ahead and tell me what the question was, where I missed the point of the question if I was wrong. I have another one come in. It says, what to do if you ask God about what is wise in some situation? What should you do in that case? If you ask God about what is wise in some situation, thought about it from every aspect, you think what you do is wise, and people still tell you you are doing it wrong. Well, I mean, I said you have to consider what people say. Wisdom will consider. I didn't say wisdom has to obey. I mean, as a pastor, I listen to what people tell me, but I don't do everything people tell me. In fact, one of the most foolish things people do is when they think that as a pastor, I'm supposed to do whatever they say, that I'm just supposed to listen to them. There's been people who've come to the church, for example, and they have been there for 2 weeks, and they suddenly feel like they need to tell me everything that I'm wrong about and that we need to change in the church and how we need to better suit their standards. And I'm just going to be honest with you. I'll listen to them. I'm respectful enough that I'll let them say what they want to say, but let me be less dramatic. Let me be honest about some example. I won't say who, but I've had people come to the church who got saved. I led them to Christ. They got saved in the time that they've talked to me, not putting power on me, but just to show that, like, in this situation, I'm the one who brought them to where they are at this point. And yet they want to come and correct me, who I've been studying the Bible. And I'm not trying to be arrogant, but I've been studying the Bible for over 20 years at this point, and full time in ministry. I mean, like, this has been my job. This has been my calling. This has been my whole heart and my life from the time I was 15 years old. And I'm, 33 years old, I'll be 34 in July. And that's been my whole heart, my whole ministry for this whole time. And you have people who've been saved 4 and 5 months, no more than a year, and they want to come and correct me on everything. And they don't want to listen. They'll go find somebody else who tells them what they want to hear. They'll search the entire internet until they find some preacher somewhere who agrees with them. And they feel like they have to correct me. Or you'll have people who maybe been saved for as long as I have, maybe even longer than I have, but they've not been able to stay in one church for more than 5 months. No more than a year if they ever stayed in a church, because they can't get along with nobody. And they go around from church to church telling every pastor why their church is wrong, instead of ever pausing to consider their own hearts. I would be foolish if I actually followed the advice of those people. However, on the other hand, when one of those people give me a legitimate, like, okay, this is something you're wrong about, when they give me a legitimate thing, I'll take their advice. Okay, you're right. I can do better about that. I mean, I had somebody who, not saved, has plenty of problems in their life, tell me that they felt like, as a pastor, I should spend more time with being not more time with people, just more friendly with people. Because if you know me, you know that, like, when I'm busy, I just don't have a naturally friendly face. And so I don't appear that friendly of a person if you don't know me. So I took that advice and said, actually, I need to make sure I smile more. I need to make sure that I at least pause to shake people's hand even when I'm busy. And I said, they're right about that. So I corrected that. I fixed that. But to answer the question that was asked, since I kind of got off of that track a little bit, you should listen to what people offer for advice, but you don't have to obey what people offer for advice. Those are two different things. So if you've done what you feel like God would have you to do, and you sincerely believe this is what God would have me do, because that's going to be the supreme wisdom in this case. This is what I really believe God would have me to do. Because it's certainly wiser to listen to God, who can part the Red Sea, than it is to try getting across the Red Sea in any other means. So if you really believe that God would have you to do what it is you're trying to do with your life, and people come in who don't understand that, don't appreciate that, and they're offering you other advice, you can listen to them. I mean, at least be courteous and kind enough to hear what they have to say. You don't even have to talk to them about the fact you disagree. Just let them talk. And then when you're done, you do what you know God's told you to do. But wisdom will at least hear and receive the instruction. Doesn't mean you have to obey it. I guess that's the answer to the question. Just because you hear it doesn't mean you have to obey it. Now, since I didn't get any second follow-up questions about the thing about being friends with a wise person, I assume I answered that well enough. And I don't see any other questions coming in. So if there's no other questions, I'll start winding down. But if there's more questions, if I didn't answer somebody's question good enough, please ask me quickly, and I'll try to answer better for you. I'll try to answer further. But just staying in that vein, though, of understanding about just because you listen to advice doesn't mean you have to take it. Again, as a pastor, and this is where I got off track a little bit a minute ago. As a pastor, I listen to the criticisms and the advice and stuff people give me, but that doesn't mean I have to run the church the way everybody thinks I should run it. I have to run it the way that I'm convicted and believe with my heart this is what God would have me to do. So every decision I make it based off of my own convictions. I'll take the information people give me, I'll consider that, but that doesn't mean I have to agree with them, and it doesn't mean I have to follow them. And it shows you the foolishness of somebody else's heart if they can't accept that. If somebody can't accept that just because you told them something doesn't mean they have to listen to you, it shows you foolishness in their heart. Because going back to that person I said that I made the comment about, just because somebody hitting themselves in the head with a hammer doesn't mean, and they say, I know what I'm doing, it doesn't mean that, they're not foolish for doing it. At the same time, if after I've told them multiple times, that you shouldn't do this and they still do it, at some point I become foolish because of the fact I don't leave them alone. It kind of goes back to what was said about answering a fool according to his folly. At some point you can answer, but also at some point you have to know when to leave it alone. So if somebody won't leave you alone and they see that they've given you their opinion, but you don't agree with them and you're moving on the way that you feel is best, and that shows that they don't know how to apply knowledge either. That there's some foolishness there on their side as well. So hopefully that explains everything in those terms, answers whatever questions you have. I don't see any new questions, so let me throw up that banner we always do. All right. I appreciate everyone who was a part of the study. I hope it was helpful. I hope it was a good way to tie everything in for you. People often would say you have no faith. If you say I am waiting for this or that, it is not easy to hear that someone tells you you have no faith. Yeah, I mean, it's never easy to be criticized, never easy to be rebuked or reproved. But again, if you know for sure what you're doing is what God would have you to do, then at the end of the day, you have to stay the course following what God would have you to do. Being wise doesn't mandate that you obey everybody. It just mandates that you do receive instruction, you take reproof, you consider those things. So people may be hurtful. People may be foolish. I mean, their advice may be awful. I'm just saying you need to hear it. You need to listen to it, consider what it is. Doesn't mean you have to take it fully and agree with everything that was said. Again, I've taken advice from some of the most foolish people you will ever meet in your life. I mean, people who are grown adults with the understanding of a baby. I have taken advice from them because I'll hear it. I'll hear what they have to say. And sometimes they have good stuff to say. Sometimes they're right. I mean, sometimes the people who are the least mature, well, every once in a while, I mean, it's the saying, a broken clock is right twice a day. So, I mean, they may not be right all the time, but they'll be right sometimes. So it's foolish to not hear it. It's foolish not to listen. It doesn't mean you have to obey it. That's the thing it keeps coming back to. So if people say mean stuff to you, doesn't mean you have to take it to heart. It doesn't mean you have to constantly take the beating. But if you heard what they have to say, you can move on. You can, okay, I agree or I disagree, and we move on from here. At some point, you may have to tell them, look, it's enough. Be respectful, but it's enough. That doesn't mean you have to take abuse just to be wise. At some point, you can shut that down too. I keep getting strange comments in here. I don't know what they are, even if they're on the YouTube. So I have to go check what that out is. We'll check out what that is in a little while. But anyways, thank you for being a part of the study, and we'll go ahead and start to close down. Appreciate you taking the time to be a part of this. Hope it's been a help to you and encouragement. Yeah, thank you for the rebuke there, Rebecca's fine. It has to be wise enough to take that to heart. But thank you anyways, everybody, for being a part of the study, for being here with us. I hope it's been a help to you. We look forward to seeing you at church tomorrow night. And then also, of course, next week we'll finish this idea about foolishness. Got a lot to say about wisdom, foolishness, all combined, all this stuff. But we'll finish the study on foolishness itself by looking at the mouth of foolishness and the way that a foolish person speaks. All right. Thank you for that. And we'll go ahead and close down the live stream.